Before we start this episode of Pandemic Chit Chat, May 2020, we just want to let all of our listeners know that all of the ideas and opinions expressed in this episode are Ida's and I's. We don't expect anyone to have to go with what we say or what we do. These are just our experiences as two 8th grade girls who are living through a pandemic, and also a lot of social justice and change that happens throughout our world every day. Thank you and enjoy. Hi, I'm Devan.
And I'm Ida.
And welcome to Pandemic Chit Chat,
the podcast where we, two 8th graders, talk about the events of the pandemic through our eyes.
Throughout the past almost year of our lives, Ida and I have been doing school from inside of our home and missing out on many things.
Many 8th graders have shared similar experiences to us, and so we're here sharing a few of them.
This is Pandemic Chit Chat. Welcome to this week's episode of Pandemic Chit Chat, June 2020. Now, June was the first month of our pandemic summer, and we are going to be discussing, what was happening in the world during June, because a lot of social justice and change was going on, especially in our city, and we would like to discuss it.
This is an episode with a lot of heavy topics, so once again, just a disclaimer that these are our own opinions. No one else's. You don't need to agree with us, but be kind.
Yeah, and we have a view. We're saying things from our view, and our view is so much different from people who go through, hate and discrimination every day. And we are just, recounting our experiences from the time, and we're living through history. So it's kind of something interesting to me that maybe one day, we'll have children or grandchildren who will study what's happening in our time right now, what's happening during the pandemic, and they'll look back and, we will have known what happened because we went through it all. How did you feel overall about your June? How was your June? How'd it go?
My June started off really slow, if I'm being honest. There was still aftershocks of George Floyd's murder, but it really wasn't until mid-June, almost late June, that protests really started happening, that at least I was aware of or that I went to. It was a lot of me actually doing Khan Academy, summer work for our school. What about you?
My family was not in DC for some of June, so I can't talk too widely about what was happening because personally and unfortunately I couldn't attend a protest, and I really wanted to, but I couldn't. But I remember my mom telling me when we were out of town that first week of June that shops had all been boarded up and some had been, riots had started and rocks were being thrown into windows, and there was a curfew, which has actually happened more times than it should have during this pandemic. But I remember thinking that it was really scary, and I was confused because it was a good cause, and it's a cause worth fighting for, and a cause that's been something we've been fighting for as a nation for a long time. And I think that the fact that people still go through racism every single day is so disgusting.
Yeah. And to me, it was sort of a culture shock because we've all read about the civil rights movement and the injustice that happened then. And even though I was aware that it could still be happening, it was so surreal to see it happening downtown.
Yeah, and being a part of it, I mean, we're only 13, but being a part of the movement and just using our voices on social media, but also in our city, because we live in a pretty diverse city, and diversity has always been something that's been a huge factor in my life because I'm mixed. So I, have seen different cultures all colliding into one, and it's a great thing um, that we need more of.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Protests also took a very different turn this year,
Yeah.
just because of the pandemic. While there was like some chants and some really large protests, the ones I went to were relatively small to reduce the risk of COVID. And even though I wanted to go to so many of the larger ones, like it wasn't safe. One, because of the riot police, but two, just because there's a virus that was really surging at that moment.
There's a lot to discuss that I think we will definitely go back to in when we go all the way forward to January of 2021, because we're going to compare the Capitol riot to protests. But it's just insane to me how violent things got when all the people who were protesting were really just trying to keep it peaceful, and they were just, you know, things got
Yeah,
way out of hand when they really shouldn't have.
like way out of
Yeah,
hand.
and it was just a way to send a message to our leadership and government of the country that they needed to do something about this.
Hmm.
Um, because it's been decades and people still suffer from it every day.
For sure. And watching on the news the videos of riots that were happening and seeing like our local CVS boarded up, like I was scared. And I wouldn't say I was scared because of the protests getting out of hand, because everybody knows that like violence is sometimes necessary as we can look back at the civil rights movement. But we live 10, 15 minutes from downtown. And so I was scared that it would get so out of hand that it would come up here
Yeah,
and like this would be, yeah.
it's never fun when that happens. What was your experience going to a protest? Like, how did it open your eyes to what was happening around you?
Okay. The support was a big thing I noticed. On the news, I heard a lot of government officials not being supportive. But when I was there, we did a drive-by protest. So we were standing on the side of the road with signs. And the amount of times that the whole street would just be filled with honking cars, like showing their support was just crazy. And I felt really hopeful that we could do something with the amount of support we got.
I also remember seeing a lot of action on social media because we were still living through a pandemic and we were still basically at one of the heights of the pandemic, and COVID cases were still pretty high. And so it was kind of hard for protests to be the way you normally are, like you said. So by social media, people were kind of spreading interesting things through their platforms, like petitions and resources where you could donate to help, and just learning about what was going on in our world was super important, and being aware. And I
For
think
sure.
people who are more who have a big following, like celebrities and people who are pretty popular, they kind of can use their voice to spread awareness and their platform, and I think that's something that I saw a lot of people who I look up to do, and so I think that was really inspiring.
Yeah. But then there's of course celebrities that don't
Yeah.
use their platform and their following to do a lot. And so, yeah, there's a lot of debate about performative activism and what that really meant and if or how it helped.
Yeah, I think there is a point where you are trying to do it to really help and really spread awareness and help and show that you truly care about a cause, but then there's also kind of where you're doing it just because if you don't do it you're going to come off as a bad person.
Yeah.
And we live in an era of so many of the influencers, the era of
Hmm.
influencers, because social media now is like a job and it's
Yeah.
work, and whether you're creating content, but with that comes a lot of responsibility because you people who are watching you take in a lot of your values and what you practice. And so, especially as like young kids nowadays who are like watching YouTube videos and have people and have YouTubers that they like to watch, I think that you have to be sending off the right message to younger minds.
Yeah.
What else?
Moving on, how did you feel about the start of your summer with COVID? I know a lot of people go on vacations and stuff, but how is that different for you?
So, for my family, we were very, very lucky, and we got to go on a couple of vacations during COVID because summertime is definitely a time that I see family. And obviously, you have traditions during the summer that you want to like uphold, like trips or family reunions or something, that all really could have gotten canceled this year. So, the beginning of my summer was probably one of my best times during COVID. It was probably when I was honestly the happiest because when COVID first started, there was a shock and there was disbelief and there was false hope. And so I didn't really have time to process the idea of what if this is more of a permanent thing. And when I got to that point, mentally, I kind of was not in a good space, and I think relying on teachers is a very important thing, but it's also kind of something that they don't, you can't really make a humongous connection over a computer screen.
Mhm.
But my first month of summer was probably one of my high points of COVID. How
My
about you?
summer was like pretty on the low side.
Hmm.
That first month of June, I tried to do like a lot of virtual camps. They didn't go too well, but and it was a lot of like spending time outdoors. I was practicing for like the upcoming volleyball season with a coach who like lives next door to me outside. It was like a big difference in sort of my daily life, especially now that I didn't have school to do.
I remember in the first parts of COVID, April and May, kind of, I didn't wear a mask as much because I didn't go outside as much. I didn't go to like
Mhm.
CVS or the grocery store with my parents, didn't go shopping or anything. So,
Yeah.
but when summer came and you wanted to walk around outside and maybe, start outdoor dining, then you would have
Mhm.
to like be constantly wearing a mask. Um, and then there were a lot of anti-mask.
Yeah.
Um,
There were a lot of them over the summer, like more than now.
yeah, um, people who refuse to wear their masks just mind boggle me. It really.
Yeah. Like I understand that they're like sometimes they're not very comfortable. I mean, I personally love mine because it hides like the bottom half of my face. Um, but I mean, like it was hard in the summer, like wearing a mask, even though it was 90 degrees outside. But a lot of us did it like in hope that the fall would be back to normal or we get some sort of normalcy back. And even though that hasn't happened yet, it's still really important to wear your mask.
Yeah, wearing masks is probably like one of the biggest things that's changed because it's just so natural and it's just in our everyday routine now. I think one of the interesting things for me over the pandemic is how our country never went into an official lockdown state,
Yes.
whereas Britain has had, I think, multiple lockdowns, along with China and Italy have had more and more lockdowns than we have, and I think it's helped them get it under control much more. But some of the American people are very stubborn. um,
Hmm.
Not just that, but we have a lot of people out there working who aren't all doctors and nurses, but also grocery store workers and firefighters and police people and people who basically are front frontline workers.
Yeah.
So a lockdown would be kind of hard to achieve. It could happen.
It would.
Hard.
Um, like economically. That
Econ-
was the big thing that a lot of the more right-leaning people were worried about, that it would shut down the economy.
but I think we're a country that's constantly moving, and there's constantly hustle and bustle going on, and every day newer facts and government policies, and people out there, the working class of this country never stops, and they have a huge resilience. And so now that people are kind of up and running a little more, I think that the world kind of has that old feel it used to. Everything's definitely nowhere near the same, but in the
We're
beginning,
getting there.
yeah, in the beginning of the pandemic, we were all paused in the beginning of the pandemic. But I think slowly we're resuming.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. Like, totally.
Yeah.
We're getting back to the way it was before, slowly but surely. Like, it's coming along.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Pandemic Chit Chat.
With Devin and Ida.